Mist hung low over Hollowmere, clinging to the crooked rooftops and the brittle bones of dying trees. The dawn light barely touched the earth, pale and cold, as if the sun itself feared this forgotten place. Hollowmere was a village that time had abandoned, a patchwork of stone cottages, dirt paths, and smoke rising from hearths that burned more hope than wood. The forest around it loomed like a silent predator, its whispers carried on the wind. They said wolves lived there, but no one dared to speak of what kind. Ilara pressed her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the chill cutting through the thin wool. Her hands were red and raw from scrubbing clothes in the river. The air smelled of iron and frost. Behind her, the cottage she called home leaned like an old drunk, its thatched roof sagging under last night's rain. Inside, her parents argued in hushed, broken tones. She knew that sound. It meant desperation. "We have no choice," her father said, his voice trembling like a man standing before judgment. Her mother replied in a low whisper, "She's strong. The hunters said they need laborers. She'll live better than here." Ilara froze. Her heart seemed to stop, then rush in a wild panic. Laborers? Hunters? She stepped inside, mud clinging to her boots. Her parents fell silent. "What did you do?" she asked. Her voice cracked like ice. Her mother avoided her gaze, tears glistening in her eyes. Her father finally spoke, his words slow and heavy. "They offered silver. Enough to pay our debt. You'll work for them just for a while, it's the only way." Ilara shook her head. "Hunters don't hire, they hunt." Before she could move, 3 men entered the doorway, armor dark with travel dust, their cloaks lined with wolf pelts. The one in front smiled, a predator's smile. "Ilara of Hollowmere?" Her father nodded weakly. The man's gloved hand clamped around Ilara's wrist. She fought, kicked, screamed, but no one came to help. Villagers turned away. The hunters were law. They dragged her through the village and into the forest road. The trees closed in, tall and solemn. She could smell the iron tang of their weapons. "Please," she begged, "you've made a mistake." "No mistake," the leader said. "The king pays for wolves, not words." Her stomach twisted. "I'm not a wolf," he smirked. "You will be before the blade falls. They all are." By dusk, they reached the clearing, the howling hills. Stones stood in a circle, carved with runes from older times. Fires burned at the edges, throwing red light on their faces. The scent of silver filled the air. They bound her to a post, her breath coming in broken gasps. Fear clawed through her chest. She remembered the tales, how hunters believed that blood revealed the hidden beast. One cut, and if the moon's curse lived within you, your soul was forfeit. The leader raised his sword, its edge gleaming like a cold star. Ilara closed her eyes and whispered, "If any god still listens, let me live." Then it happened. A low, thunderous growl rolled through the night. The firelight wavered as shadows bent and broke. The hunters froze. From the darkness between the trees, eyes glowed gold, ancient, furious, and unyielding. A voice deep and commanding filled the clearing. "Enough!" The hunters stepped back as a figure emerged, a man cloaked in black fur, taller than any warrior, his presence swallowing the firelight. His gaze locked on Ilara. "Who dares spill innocent blood in my lands?" The leader stammered, "Your Majesty, she bears the mark." "She bears no curse," the stranger said, his voice like thunder in winter. "Release her." The sword lowered. Every hunter bowed, trembling. Ilara stared, trembling too, not from fear, but from something deeper. The man's eyes held the wild, and yet mercy. In that moment, she knew 2 truths. The stories were real, and she had just been claimed by the Alpha King himself. If you wish to know what becomes of Ilara beneath the moonlit rule of the Alpha King, stay close. Subscribe and walk with her into the dark heart of Eldervale. The fire still burned in the clearing, but no one dared to move. The presence of the Alpha King pressed down like the weight of a storm. His eyes, molten gold in the firelight, scanned the hunters before settling on Ilara. Still bound, trembling, her pulse fluttering against the rope at her wrist. "Untie her," he said. The leader of the hunters hesitated, his jaw tightening. "My lord, she was found beyond the border. The mark—" Kyle stepped closer, his shadow swallowing the man whole. "You speak of marks, while your hands drip with fear. I said untie her." The hunter obeyed, fumbling with the knots. When the rope fell away, Ilara collapsed to her knees, her limbs shaking from exhaustion and cold. She stared at the ground, afraid to meet the Alpha King's gaze. Kale's voice softened. "You are safe now." She almost laughed. Safe was a word that had long lost its meaning. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Why would you save me?" His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Because innocence should not bleed in my kingdom," the hunters murmured among themselves. One of them, braver or more foolish than the rest, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, with respect, she's human. The law forbids our kind from interfering. The council—" "The council," Kale cut in, "answers to me." His tone left no space for defiance. "And if the council has forgotten mercy, I will remind them." The hunter fell silent. The others lowered their heads, the scent of fear thick in the air. Kyle turned to Ilara once more. "What is your name?" "Ilara," she managed to say. "From where?" "Hollowmere." At that, the hunters exchanged glances. One of them spat into the dirt. "A cursed village. The last time we found one from there, she shifted beneath the moon." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "Do you see a wolf before you now?" "No, my lord." "Then you will not call her cursed again." Silence followed, deep and heavy. The Alpha King's command carried more than authority. It carried something ancient, a resonance that seemed to reach into the bones of every living thing around him. Ilara felt it too. Beneath her fear, something stirred. His voice, though fierce, didn't strike her as cruel. It was a voice that had carried burdens she could not name. He gestured to one of his guards, a man whose armor bore the silver crest of the moon. "Take her to the palace. She will stay under my protection until the full moon passes." The leader of the hunters paled. "Your Majesty, that is forbidden. A human cannot enter the Moon Keep." Kyle's gaze hardened. "Then let tonight mark the breaking of that law." The hunters dropped to their knees, heads bowed. They knew better than to argue further. Kyle extended a hand toward Ilara. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers trembling as they touched his. His hand was warm, steady, too real to be a dream. "Come," he said quietly. "You will not return to Hollowmere." She looked back toward the road, the trees swallowing the path home. "There's nothing left there," she murmured. Kale's jaw clenched, a flicker of empathy in his eyes. "Then we are the same." As they walked away from the clearing, Ilara felt the eyes of the hunters burning holes in her back. The whispers followed her like ghosts, the girl who made the Alpha break his own law. At the edge of the forest, Kyle paused and looked up at the rising moon. "Do not fear what you cannot yet understand," he said. "The world is darker than you've been told, Ilara of Hollowmere, but within that dark some light endures." She wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words died in her throat. Somewhere deep inside, a strange warmth began to bloom, part terror, part wonder. She had been sold to death, yet now walked beside the most feared creature in Eldervale. And though she did not know it, the moment Kale chose to save her had already begun to change the fate of both their worlds. When Ilara opened her eyes, the world was no longer made of dirt and shadow. She lay beneath silk sheets, the faint scent of myrrh and cedar drifting through the air. A single beam of morning light slipped through tall, arched windows, painting gold across stone walls. For a long moment, she did not move. The silence was heavy, unnatural, too clean, too still. Then the realization struck. She was alive. Her hands searched her wrists. No rope, no blood. Only faint bruises where the hunters had bound her. Her heart pounded with the memory of the night before. The growl, the eyes, the king, the Alpha. The door creaked open. A young servant entered, her face pale as milk. "You're awake," she whispered, bowing quickly. "The king ordered that you be given food and rest." Ilara tried to sit, but her limbs were weak. "Where am I?" "In the Moon Keep, my lady," the girl said, glancing toward the windows. "The king's fortress." Ilara laughed softly, though it sounded more like disbelief. "I'm no lady." The servant didn't answer. Her gaze darted nervously toward the hallway, as though afraid even the walls could hear. "You should not speak so freely," she murmured. "There are ears everywhere." Before Ilara could ask more, the girl hurried out, leaving behind a tray of bread, fruit, and water. Hunger gnawed at her, but she was too unsettled to eat. The Moon Keep. She had heard stories of it, how it stood on the edge of the kingdom, half fortress, half legend. No human had ever crossed its gates and lived to tell the tale. Yet here she was, wrapped in silk and sunlight, in the heart of the wolves' domain. Hours passed before the sound of boots echoed beyond the door. When it opened again, Kale stood there. He filled the doorway with his presence, broad-shouldered, his black hair damp from the morning mist. His eyes, no longer glowing but still unearthly, met hers with a quiet intensity. "You are awake," he said. Elara stiffened. "I don't understand. Why bring me here? Why not send me home?" Kyle stepped inside, each movement deliberate, measured. "Because your home would no longer be safe. The hunters do not forgive humiliation." "Then you should have let them kill me," she said bitterly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "I do not let innocents die to soothe the pride of men." She wanted to hate him for his calm, for the power in his voice, but something in it, something beneath the authority, held sorrow. "What happens now?" she asked. "You will stay until I decide otherwise," he replied. "No one is to harm you, no one is to question why." "Then I am a prisoner." His gaze lingered on her, unreadable. "If you wish to see it that way." Ilara's chest tightened. "What other way is there?" He didn't answer at once. His eyes drifted to the window, where the early sun glinted on the castle's golden spires. "A cage can keep out danger as much as it keeps one within," he said finally. She followed his gaze, watching light dance over the marble floor. "And which am I? Protected or trapped?" Kale looked back at her. "Both." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The distance between them felt like the width of a blade. Then he turned toward the door. "Rest, Ilara of Hollowmere. The court will hear of your presence soon enough. When they do, there will be questions and danger." "From your own kind?" she asked. "Especially from them." He paused at the threshold, his voice low. "Do not wander the halls after dusk. The walls remember more than you might wish to hear." When he was gone, the room seemed colder. Ilara sank against the pillows, her mind a storm of confusion. Saved by a monster, guarded by silence, surrounded by beauty that felt more like chains. She was no longer a girl of Hollowmere. She was something else now, something the kingdom had no name for. And beyond the golden windows, the forest howled her name once more. Night crept over the moonkeep, like a living shadow. Candles flickered in the corridors, their light bending against the chill that seeped from the stone. Ilara sat by the window of her chamber, staring at the forest that stretched endlessly below. The trees moved as though breathing, the wind carrying faint howls that made her chest tighten. She could not sleep. Every hour since Kyle's visit had been filled with questions she couldn't silence. Why save her? Why defy his own kind? The way he had spoken, controlled, solemn yet burdened, echoed in her thoughts. She felt like a thread pulled into something vast and unseen. The door creaked softly. "You should not sit so close to the window after dark," a voice warned. Ilara turned. A tall woman stood there, her silver gown reflecting the candlelight. Her eyes, pale as frost, held the weight of secrets. "I didn't hear you come in," Ilara said, rising to her feet. "That is because I walk where sound dares not follow." The woman smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "I am Lady Mira. I serve the king, and I make certain the guests under his roof understand what that means." Ilara hesitated. "Then tell me what I am doing here. He said I was safe, but this doesn't feel like mercy." Mira's gaze sharpened. "Safety in this castle is not mercy, girl. It is a promise, one easily broken." She moved closer, studying Ilara as if she were reading a dangerous text. "Humans who enter the Moon Keep rarely leave it." The words hung heavy in the air. "Then why bring me?" Ilara asked quietly. "Because Kyle sees what others cannot," Mira replied. "He sees things written in bloodlines, not on skin. Perhaps he saw something in you worth saving, or something worth binding." Ilara's pulse quickened. "I'm no one," she insisted. "I was sold by my own parents. There's nothing special in me." Mira tilted her head, almost pitying. "Then tell me." "No one. Why does the moon call your name?" Before Ilara could answer, a soft murmur rose from beyond the walls. It was faint at first, like wind brushing through hollow wood. Then it grew, whispers twining together, speaking in a language she couldn't understand. She froze, her breath catching. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Mira's expression didn't change. "Yes. And if you are wise, you will not listen." But Ilara couldn't help it. The sound seeped through her bones, sweet and sorrowful. It felt like the forest itself was calling her. She stepped toward the window again, but Mira's hand gripped her wrist, firm as iron. "Enough," the woman said. "You are under his protection, but protection has limits. The moon is cruel to those who seek its secrets." Ilara met her gaze. "You talk as if it's alive." Mira's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "It is more alive than most of us." A knock interrupted them. A guard entered, bowing his head. "Lady Mira, the king requests your presence in the great hall." Mira released Ilara's wrist but didn't look away. "Do not leave this room, no matter what you hear," she warned. Then she was gone, her steps fading into silence. Left alone, Ilara sank onto the edge of the bed. Her skin tingled where Mira had touched her. The whispers had stopped, but the quiet felt heavier than sound. Outside, the moon rose full and bright, casting a silver glow across the room. Her shadow stretched long against the floor. For a moment, she thought she saw it tremble, not from her movement, but as if it breathed on its own. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself. "It's only the wind," she whispered. But the words didn't convince her. Somewhere deep in the forest, a howl echoed, low, mournful, and impossibly familiar. And though she didn't know why, Ilara felt it answer inside her chest, as if something ancient had just awakened. By the time the moon faded, the castle had come alive. Servants rushed through the marble halls carrying trays of wine and roasted meats, their movements precise and silent, under the watch of armored guards. The Feast of Blood and Fire was not a celebration, it was a declaration of power. Every noble, every clan leader, every wolf who owed allegiance to the crown would gather to witness the strength of their alpha king. Ilara stood before a tall mirror, wearing a dress she didn't choose. Its deep crimson fabric shimmered in the torchlight, heavy with gold embroidery. The maid who dressed her had said nothing except that the king requested her presence. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the neckline, feeling like an imposter inside the skin of someone else's life. When the guard came for her, she followed in silence through corridors that smelled faintly of smoke and wine. The great hall loomed ahead, vast, filled with flickering flames and the low hum of conversation. Hundreds of eyes turned when she entered. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A human. The girl from Hollowmere. The king's charity. Ilara wanted to shrink away, but her feet carried her forward. Kyle sat at the end of the long table, a crown of black iron resting on his brow. The firelight caught the faint silver of his armor, his expression calm but unreadable. He stood as she approached. "You came." "I wasn't given much choice," she answered quietly. His mouth curved in the faintest hint of a smile. Few ever are. A hush fell over the hall as Kyle raised a cup. "Tonight, we honor the unity of our kin," he declared. "But unity means nothing if we forget mercy. The strength of the pack lies not only in blood but in restraint." His words stirred murmurs among the nobles. Some bowed their heads in agreement, others exchanged wary glances. One man, tall and broad-shouldered, rose from the lower end of the table. His eyes gleamed with challenge. "Forgive me, my king, but restraint is not what built our power. Fear did, and fear keeps us free." Kale's gaze fixed on him. "And what is your name, that you speak so boldly?" "Lord Fenric," the man replied. "Beta of the Northern Claw. I speak only truth. The pack whispers that you've grown soft, saving humans, breaking sacred law. They wonder if your heart beats like a man's, not a wolf's." The room froze. The tension was so thick Ilara could taste it. Kyle's voice was low but sharp. "Come forward, Lord Fenric." Fenric obeyed, pride flashing in his eyes. He stood before the throne, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "We are not men," he said, his tone mocking. "We are beasts of the moon, and beasts do not bow to weakness." The fire roared suddenly, as if the air itself obeyed Kyle's fury. In an instant, his eyes burned gold, his teeth lengthened, and the hall filled with the low growl of a predator who needed no words. Fenric froze, his defiance faltering. Kyle rose, his voice resonant. "Do you mistake mercy for weakness?" He stepped closer until their faces were inches apart. "Mercy is control. Mercy is power chained, not lost." No one moved. The hall was silent, except for the crackle of fire. Kyle turned away, his command absolute. "Sit down, Lord Fenric, before I remind you what fear truly feels like." The Beta obeyed, his arrogance shattered. Kyle looked back to Ilara. "Eat," he said quietly. "No one will touch you here." But even as she tried to swallow the food before her, Ilara felt the weight of every gaze upon her. She realized the truth. Kyle had not just protected her life, he had staked his throne on it. And in the eyes of the pack, mercy might yet draw more blood than any blade. The aftermath of the feast lingered like smoke in the corridors of the Moonkeep. Servants moved quietly, eyes downcast. The fire in the great hall had burned low, but the memory of Kale's voice, of his fury, still echoed. Ilara hadn't seen him since that night. Days passed in a restless blur. Her meals were brought in silence. Lady Mira came once, only to remind her, "The king needs time to think. You would be wise to give it." Elara paced the walls of her chamber until they felt like they were closing in. Sleep brought no peace, only dreams of wolves beneath blood-red skies. And always, Kyle's voice at the edge of them, just out of reach. When the knock finally came, it was near midnight. A guard waited beyond the door. "His Majesty requests your presence." The walk through the keep was silent. The halls were darker than usual, lit only by the moon filtering through tall windows. Kyle was alone in the observatory, a circular chamber high above the rest of the castle. The walls were glass and stone, open to the night. Wind swept through, carrying the distant cry of wolves. He stood with his back to her, staring at the moon. "You shouldn't be out here," he said without turning. "The full moon stirs more than the tides." "I wasn't given a choice," Elara replied. He finally looked at her. His face was pale, drawn tight with something unspoken. "Do you feel it?" She stepped closer. "Feel what?" "The pull, the weight." "Like something in your blood is waking." Elara hesitated. "I've felt something. Dreams, whispers, but I thought—" "It's not your imagination," he said. "The moon stirs more than just wolves. It touches anyone with a link to the old blood." Her breath caught. "Are you saying I'm—" "No," he interrupted. "Not one of us. But not untouched either." He turned away, gripping the stone railing as though anchoring himself. "The curse runs deeper than most understand. We are bound to the moon by more than legend. On nights like this, I feel it pulling at my mind. It's not just transformation, it's rage, hunger, madness." Elara took a step forward. "Then why bring me here?" "If you're dangerous—" He looked over his shoulder, his voice hoarse. "Because I needed someone who sees me when I'm still a man." The words settled between them like snow, soft and heavy. She didn't know what to say. The man before her, the king feared by all, stood raw and exposed, not as a predator but as someone breaking under the weight of his own nature. "I don't understand why you'd risk all of this," she said. "For me—" Kyle turned to her fully now, his expression torn between restraint and desperation. "Because I've spent years surrounded by those who serve, who obey, who fear. You look at me and ask why. You fight back. You remind me that I was once something other than a weapon." Silence fell. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the floor. Kyle's hands trembled. "I can't control it much longer," he said. "The closer the moon draws, the thinner the barrier becomes. Soon I won't know who I am." Elara moved closer. "Then let me help." His eyes flared, gold and sharp. "You don't know what you're offering." "No," she admitted, "but I know what it feels like to be alone. And I know what it means when someone chooses to protect you, even when they don't have to." Kyle stared at her for a long time. Then he nodded, barely. "Stay, then, until this night passes. But if I change, you run. You don't look back." She met his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." Above them, the moon watched in silence, its pull tightening. And beneath its gaze, something between them began to shift. Fragile, uncertain, but real. Dawn broke cold and silent. Mist curled over the distant hills, clinging to the castle walls like a shroud. Elara stood in the courtyard, her cloak pulled tightly around her as she waited. Kyle had summoned her without explanation, his message short. "Come before the sun reaches the gate." He appeared from the far corridor, flanked by 2 guards who stopped at the archway, leaving him to approach alone. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his stride, a restlessness that hadn't been there the night before. "I need your trust," he said without preamble. "I already gave it," Elara replied, "or I wouldn't be standing here." He nodded once. "Then follow me." They left the castle behind, horses waiting at the edge of the trees. Neither spoke as they rode through dense forest, branches brushing overhead like skeletal hands. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken thoughts, questions too dangerous to ask. After nearly an hour, they arrived at a clearing where the trees opened into a circle of stones. Each one was etched with symbols that glowed faintly beneath the early light. A quiet hum seemed to rise from the ground itself. "This place is sacred," Kyle said as he dismounted. "Older than our laws, older than the blood that binds us." Elara stepped cautiously across the moss-covered ground. "What is this?" "The ritual of oaths," he replied. "A binding place. It hears truth, and truth spoken here cannot be undone." She turned to him, eyes narrowing. What are you asking me to do? Cale reached into the folds of his cloak and drew out a small, curved blade. There are whispers among the clans. They fear what you are, or might become. Some believe your blood carries a spark of the old magic, the kind we thought lost. That's ridiculous, Elara said. I'm not— You don't know what you are yet, he interrupted. But they're watching, testing my rule. If I don't give them a sign that you stand under my protection, under my command, they will act. Elara stared at the blade, then at him. You want me to swear loyalty? No, Kyle said. I want us to swear it to each other. His words unsettled her more than she expected. You trust me that much? I trust what I've seen, he answered, and what I feel when I look at you. Elara hesitated, then slowly stepped forward. What happens if I take the oath? We are bound, Kyle said, not just by law, but by something deeper. No wolf will move against you while you wear my mark. But if you betray it— He didn't finish. She took the blade from his hand. Then let them watch. Kyle drew his own dagger and extended his hand. Together they sliced shallow cuts across their palms. As their blood mingled, Kyle chanted in the old tongue, his voice low and rhythmic. The stones around them shimmered, the runes pulsing in time with their heartbeats. When the final word was spoken, the light vanished. The forest was silent again. It is done, he said. Elara pressed a cloth to her hand, blood still seeping through her fingers. And what now? Now, Kyle said quietly, you carry my protection, but you also carry my enemies. They rode back in silence. As the castle appeared on the horizon, Elara realized something had shifted between them and within her. She had spoken her truth beneath ancient stone. She had been seen, heard, marked. And somewhere in the shadowed woods behind them, others had heard the vow too. Not all would honor it. Some would come to test it. But Elara no longer felt like prey. She had taken the oath with a king and left the forest with power of her own. The wind carried the scent of ash long before the smoke reached the keep. Elara stood atop one of the watchtowers, her cloak whipping around her as she stared at the dark column rising from the east. Hollowmere was burning, her hands clenched against the stone railing. No one had spoken of her village since she'd arrived, and part of her had convinced herself it no longer mattered. But now, with the sky stained black, the past was clawing its way back. Behind her, Cale approached in silence. You saw it, he said. She didn't turn. Why? The hunters don't forget shame, he answered. They wanted to send a message. To you. To me. My parents were there, she said. Others who had nothing to do with this. They made their choice the day they sold you, Kyle replied, voice colder now. But you're right. Not all were guilty. Elara finally turned to face him. We have to help them. Cale's jaw tightened. If I ride now, I look weak, like their fire drove me to my knees. And if you don't ride, you abandon the very people your laws say you protect, she shot back. Is that what mercy means to you now? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kyle turned and walked away. So you have until moonrise, he said. If you choose to go, do it in secret, but I won't follow. Elara didn't waste time. She slipped out of the keep, dressed as a servant, hood low over her face. One of the guards, Torren, a young wolf with a quiet loyalty, met her by the stables without a word. The ride to Hollowmere was silent and fast. The forest felt darker than before, every tree a shadow, every whisper a threat. When they reached the edge of the village, the devastation came into full view. Homes had been reduced to blackened skeletons. The river was choked with soot. A few survivors huddled by the old well, hollow-eyed and silent. Elara dismounted and walked among them, ignoring the stares. Her heart ached at every familiar face now drawn with hunger and fear. Then she saw them, her parents. Her father's arm was in a sling, his eyes filled with shame. Her mother wept when she approached. We didn't know they'd do this, her mother cried. We thought they promised work, food. Elara's voice was flat. You sold me. Her father stepped forward. We were desperate. And now? She asked. Was it worth it? He looked away. Torren watched quietly, his hand never far from the hilt of his blade. Elara turned back to her mother. You can't stay here. They'll come again. Where would we go? Her mother asked, broken. Elara hesitated, the weight of her decision pressed down like iron. There's room at the keep, I'll find a way. They stared at her, stunned. But there was no time for argument. She and Torren began gathering the survivors, organizing what little they had. But even as they worked, Elara felt the air shift. A low whistle sliced through the trees. Torren froze. "Hunters," he said. They followed. The next moment erupted in chaos. Arrows hissed through the smoke. Screams echoed as shadows moved between the trees. Ilara dragged her mother behind a wagon as Torren drew steel and roared for the others to run. It was a blur of fire, blood, and flight. When it was over, only a few had escaped. Torren bled from a wound at his shoulder. Ilara's father was missing. Her mother refused to speak. As the survivors followed her into the woods, Ilara looked back once. Hollowmere was gone. She had tried to save what little remained of her past, only to carry the scars of it into her future. And deep inside, a single truth burned clear. Mercy without power was nothing. The castle gates closed, just as the first war horn echoed through the valley. Ilara stood at the battlements, her hands gripping the cold stone, eyes wide as the distant tree line shifted with movement. They had returned with the survivors of Hollowmere only a day ago, and already the enemy was at their doorstep. From the watchtower, Kyle watched in silence. His armor shimmered dark beneath the grey sky, and his expression was carved from stone. "How many?" Ilara asked, her voice tight. "Too many," he replied. "They move fast when they smell weakness. I didn't mean for this to happen." He turned to her. "But it did. You made a choice. Now we stand by it." Below them, the courtyard swelled with activity. Wolves in human form prepared weapons, checked defenses, and gave orders in short, clipped commands. Among them, Torren limped from wound to wound, refusing rest. Kyle gave one signal, and a horn blew in response. The gates would hold for now. "They want you," Ilara said. "They want the throne." "They want chaos," Kyle corrected. "I gave them peace. Now they think I've grown soft." She turned from the wall. "Then let me fight." He stared at her. "With what? Fury and grief?" "No," she said. "With knowledge. With every lesson your silence taught me. I can help, just not locked behind another door." Kyle hesitated, then nodded once. Inside the keep, Ilara moved fast. She remembered the runes she'd seen in the sacred stones, the way the old symbols pulsed with energy. She found the castle's scribe, a hunched man with trembling hands, and demanded ink, parchment, salt, and ash. In the lower halls, where the youngest wolves sheltered, she painted symbols across the doorways, whispering the old words Kyle had spoken during their oath. "You believe this will work?" Torren asked, watching her fingers move. "I believe in what I saw," she said. "That's enough." Above them, the sky darkened. The first arrow struck the gate like a whisper. The next came like a scream. Within minutes, the air filled with fire and steel. The hunters had come with human soldiers, drawn by gold and fear. Kyle led the charge, transforming mid-leap from man to beast, his snarl shaking the walls. His pack followed, a storm of claws and fury. From the corridors below, Ilara heard the crash of metal, the cries of the wounded. She gathered the children, guiding them toward the inner sanctum. One of them clung to her cloak. "Will the king protect us?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered, even as her own heart quaked. "He always does." She returned to the courtyard when the fighting pushed closer. Bodies littered the stones, both wolf and man. Torren was bleeding again, his blade broken. Kyle stood alone at the center, surrounded by enemies. He had shifted back, blood streaking his skin, one knee buckling beneath him. Ilara ran to him without thought. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "And yet I am," she said. "Just like you." More hunters closed in. Kyle tried to rise, but his strength was fading. Ilara stepped in front of him. Her hands glowed faintly, the same silver light she had seen once before in the sacred grove. The runes, the blood oath. She lifted her palm. The symbols she had drawn pulsed in response. The ground beneath the hunters cracked. Light burst from the runes embedded in the stone walls, surging upward like a shield. They stopped, hesitated. Ilara stood firm. "This is no longer just his kingdom." The hunters faltered, their lines breaking. In that moment, the tide turned. Wolves surged forward again. Kyle rose, eyes burning. Together, they drove the enemy from the keep. When silence returned, Ilara stood beneath the falling ash, her breath ragged, her hand still trembling with power she did not understand. But she had protected them. And the pack would never see her the same way again. The night after the battle was silent, unnaturally so. The air felt still, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. The flames that had once licked the sky now burned low in the distance, their light casting long, shifting shadows across the keep. Elara stood on the balcony of Kyle's private chambers, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The moon was full, its pale light reflecting off the blood-soaked stone below. She had seen the pack fight with a ferocity she could hardly comprehend. Yet in the midst of it all, Kyle had been different. His power had waned, his strength failing him at moments she knew he needed it most. Behind her the door creaked open. Kyle stepped inside, his face bruised and streaked with blood. His expression was hard, unreadable, yet there was a weariness in his eyes that spoke more than his words ever could. "You should rest," Elara said, her voice soft but firm. He shook his head. "There's no rest for me, not until this is over." She turned to face him, her heart aching at the sight of him. His posture was stiff, almost as if he were trying to hold himself together with sheer will. "You've been pushing yourself too hard." "I can't afford to rest," he replied, his voice hoarse. "The full moon is drawing near, and with it, the final test of my control. The pack, they're not sure they want me leading them anymore." Elara stepped closer. "Then they don't understand you. They don't need to," Kyle said bitterly. "They need a leader, someone who can lead them to victory. But what they see is a king who's weakening, someone who can't protect them the way they need." Elara's fingers brushed the back of his hand, a quiet gesture that seemed to calm the storm raging inside him. "They see what they want to see. But I see something different. I see the man who chose mercy when others would have killed me, the man who stands tall, even when his strength is faltering." Kyle's gaze softened, but the weight of the world still hung on his shoulders. "Mercy is my downfall. It's what's weakening me." "No," Elara said, shaking her head. "It's not mercy that weakens you. It's fear. Fear of losing control. Fear that if you let go, you'll lose everything." His eyes locked onto hers, searching. "And if I do lose control, if the wolf within me takes over completely, I'll be here," she whispered. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together." Kyle stepped back, his jaw tight. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me. If I fail, if I can't hold on to my humanity, the pack will fall apart. And they'll turn on me. They'll take everything." Elara's breath caught in her throat. She stepped forward, placing her hand on his chest, feeling the pounding of his heart beneath her fingers. "Then don't let them take you. Fight for them the way you fought for me." His gaze softened for a moment, and Elara saw a flicker of something, hope, maybe, before it was quickly replaced by something darker. Kyle took a step back, turning toward the window, his eyes narrowing as he looked out over the land. "You don't understand, Elara," he said quietly. "I've already lost control once. I killed my own people when the full moon took me. If I let it happen again—" "You're not the monster you think you are," she interrupted, her voice strong. "The curse doesn't define you, Kyle. You define it." He met her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, Elara saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes. He was afraid, not of the pack, but of himself. Kyle closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can control it this time. You don't have to do it alone." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The weight of what they were both facing hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Finally, Kyle turned back to face her, his expression resolute. "You're right," he said, his voice firmer now. "I can't do this alone, but I won't lose myself again. Not if I have you by my side." Elara's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and fear. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, and she couldn't predict what would happen when the moon reached its peak. But for the first time, she believed that they might survive it. Together. Kyle reached for her, pulling her close, and for a fleeting moment they stood there in silence, letting the bond between them strengthen. The storm was coming, and together they would face it, whatever it was. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the ancient woods. Elara walked alongside Kyle, the forest around them alive with the sounds of night. Yet there was a heavy silence between them, a weight that neither could shake. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, but there was something else, a deep, unsettling hum in the atmosphere. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more oppressive it became. The trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches clawing at the sky like dark fingers. Even the ground beneath their feet felt different, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow them whole. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as they moved forward, the path ahead barely visible through the dense mist. Kyle led, his steps sure. though there was a tension in his posture that was impossible to ignore. He had warned her about this place, the Forest of No Return. It was said to be cursed, a place where few who entered ever came back. It was where the old magic lingered, stronger than any human could comprehend. "Are we close?" Elara asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would summon something worse from the shadows. Kyle didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed ahead. "Closer," he said finally. "The temple is at the heart of the forest, but we cannot reach it in the daylight. The magic here is strongest at night." Elara glanced around nervously. The trees towered over them like silent sentinels, and the mist clung to her skin, making her feel as though she were walking through some kind of dream. "What are we looking for exactly?" "The Heartstone," Kyle replied. "It's the source of the power here. It binds the magic of this place, and if we're to break the curse—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "I need to confront it. The moon's power, the wolf inside me, it's all tied to this place." Elara's thoughts churned. The curse Kale carried, the struggle between the man and the beast, was rooted in the very land they were walking on. She could feel the weight of it in the air, in every step they took. "You're not alone," she said quietly, her voice stronger than she felt. "Whatever happens, I'll be here." Kyle finally looked at her, his eyes softening. "I know." They walked in silence for what seemed like hours, the oppressive stillness of the forest pressing in around them. Finally, they reached the clearing. In the center, rising from the earth like a jagged tooth, stood an ancient stone structure, cracked and worn by time, but still standing strong. The Temple of the Moon was covered in moss, its walls etched with runes that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. "This is it," Kyle said, his voice low. He turned to Elara. "Once we enter, there's no turning back. The magic here will try to twist us, to pull us apart. I can't promise you'll be safe." Elara swallowed hard, but her resolve was clear. "I don't need promises. I need you to fight." Kale gave her a sharp nod. Without another word, he stepped forward, his hand brushing against the stone. The temple trembled as if it recognized him, and the air grew colder, heavier. The runes flared to life, their light bright enough to cast long shadows across the clearing. Elara followed him, heart racing. As they crossed the threshold, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The magic was tangible now, swirling around them, whispering in ancient tongues. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, the temple itself alive, aware. "This is the heart of the curse," Kale said, his voice barely a whisper. "And now I have to face it." The walls of the temple seemed to close in, the shadows stretching like tendrils. Elara felt the pull of the magic around them, trying to separate her from Kyle, to drag her into the depths of the unknown. But she remained by his side, unwavering. "Stay close," Kyle murmured, his hand finding hers. Together they moved deeper into the heart of the temple. The air grew thick with power, every step feeling like a challenge to their very existence. The walls around them whispered secrets, promises, and threats. At the center of the temple stood a pedestal, upon which lay a single glowing stone, the Heartstone. It pulsed with an otherworldly light, its power radiating outward in waves. Kyle stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the stone. "This is it," he whispered. "The source of everything." Elara's grip on his hand tightened as the air crackled with energy. The moment they approached the Heartstone, the magic of the temple surged, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. "This is where it all changes," Kyle said, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. And in that moment, Elara knew that the battle for Kale's soul, for their survival, was about to begin. The Heartstone pulsed with a quiet, resonating hum, filling the temple with its otherworldly energy. The walls seemed to breathe, the ancient runes around them glowing with a blue light that flickered in rhythm with the stone's pulse. Kyle stood before it, frozen in place, his expression tense as though he were struggling against an invisible force. Elara's grip on his hand tightened. "I've come this far," Kyle said, his voice strained. "But the price of this is high. The moment I touch that stone, it will take everything I have, everything I am." Elara didn't need to ask what he meant. The curse that bound him to the moon, the beast that clawed beneath his skin, was not something easily dismissed. The Heartstone was the key to controlling it, but at what cost? Kale turned to her, his golden eyes dark with emotion. "The Pack will never accept me if I fail, but if I succeed," his breath caught in his chest, "I will lose the man I've fought so hard to keep, the king, the protector. All of it will slip away." Elara took a step forward, her heart aching at the torment in his eyes. "Cale," she whispered, "what will you become if you don't try?" His gaze flickered with doubt, and for the first time she saw the weight of his fear, the fear of losing himself to the curse, to the wolf that roared beneath his skin. "I don't know who I will be," he admitted. "I've spent my life fighting this, but I've never truly known if I could win. If I become the beast, I lose everything. And if you don't try," Ilara said softly, "you lose yourself anyway." Kyle closed his eyes, a long exhale escaping his lips. The air in the temple thickened, the magic pressing in around them. He could feel the pull of the Heartstone, the promise of control, but also the price it demanded. "You're asking me to choose between what I've always known and what I could become," Kyle said, his voice tight with the weight of the decision. "I'm asking you to choose yourself," Ilara replied. "Not as the king, not as the Alpha, just as you." For a long moment, Kyle stood silent, his chest rising and falling with each breath, the sound of his heartbeat echoing in his ears. Ilara could feel his turmoil, the uncertainty clawing at him like the wolf inside, pushing him toward the stone. Finally, with a steadying breath, Kyle stepped forward. His fingers brushed against the cold surface of the Heartstone, the pulsing light brighter now, responding to his touch. The magic in the air crackled, as though it recognized his struggle. "I will fight," Kyle said, his voice low but resolute. "I will fight for what's left of me, for you." With that, he closed his eyes and pressed his palm flat against the Heartstone. The stone flared, a blinding light enveloping him, and Ilara staggered back, shielding her eyes from the overwhelming brightness. The air around them hummed with raw, untamed energy. Inside the light, Cale's body jerked, his muscles twitching and straining. Ilara felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, the force of the magic pulsing through the temple, shaking the very foundations. She could hear Kyle's breathing, sharp and erratic, as though he were caught between two worlds, human and beast. Then, as quickly as the light had flared, it dimmed. The tremors subsided. The temple fell into an eerie stillness. Ilara opened her eyes, her heart racing. Kyle stood before her, his hand still resting on the Heartstone, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the magic. His golden eyes had dimmed, but they were no longer filled with the same wildness. The wolf inside him still lingered, but it was quiet now, contained. He took a deep breath, looking at Ilara with a sense of both relief and sorrow. "I didn't lose myself," he said, his voice hoarse, "but I don't know if I can ever be the same again." Ilara stepped forward, her heart swelling with emotion. "You didn't lose yourself, Kyle. You chose to keep your heart." Kyle looked at her, his gaze softening. "And you stayed with me." For a moment, the world outside the temple seemed to fade away. There was no pack, no kingdom, just the two of them, standing in the heart of the storm, their hands clasped together. "Always," Ilara whispered, her voice steady and true. They stood there for a long time, the Heartstone pulsing softly in the background, as if the temple itself were watching, waiting, and knowing that Cale had made his choice, and that choice had been the hardest, yet most important, decision of his life. The forest had calmed after the storm of magic, but the tension in the air remained. Kyle stood before Ilara, his hand still resting on the Heartstone, but now the stone pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm, no longer a blinding light, but a quiet promise. His golden eyes, once fierce and untamed, now held a new calmness. Though the wolf within him still lingered, it was no longer the beast that ruled him. The temple was silent, the ancient stones around them absorbing the weight of Cale's decision. The air felt thick with the lingering magic, as though it was still trying to make sense of what had just transpired. "You did it," Ilara whispered, taking a cautious step forward. "You didn't lose yourself." Kyle turned to face her, his breath still ragged, but the wildness in his eyes had been replaced with something deeper, a weariness that spoke of battles fought, not just with others, but with himself. "I don't know if I'm the same man," he said quietly, "but I know that I'm still here, and that's enough." Ilara reached out, her fingers brushing his. The connection between them felt stronger now, almost like the heartbeat of the earth itself pulsing beneath their feet. The bond they shared had shifted, deepened, as though the curse that had once tied him to the moon had been replaced by something far more powerful, something that wasn't just about the curse but about them. "You're more than you think," Ilara replied, her voice steady, though her heart was still racing. "And this bond, what we've just done, it's not just about magic. It's about us, choosing each other." Kyle's gaze softened, the corners of his lips twitching as though he wanted to smile, but the weight of the moment kept it from fully forming. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. "I chose you," he said, his voice low and rough, "and in doing so, I chose myself." Elara could feel the truth in his words, the weight of them settling deep in her chest. This wasn't just about the battle for control over the wolf inside him. This was about their shared future, about the choices they made together. The heartstone behind them pulsed once more, its light flickering, then dimming, as though it recognized the shift in Kale in both of them. The magic was still there, but it had changed. It no longer sought to control. It was now a part of the bond they had forged. "Elara," Kale said softly, his hand brushing her cheek, "I don't know what will come next, but I do know that with you by my side, I don't have to face it alone." She smiled, the weight of everything that had happened, all the fear and uncertainty, melting away in that moment. The pack, the throne, the war, they all seemed distant now, irrelevant in comparison to what she had chosen. What they had chosen. "We face it together," she whispered. The temple seemed to hum with energy, its ancient walls now silent witnesses to the vow they had made. Outside, the moon rose higher in the sky, its light now softer, gentler, as if reflecting the change that had taken place within Kyle and between them. Kyle stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers, and extended his hand. "Let's go home. Home." For the first time, Elara truly understood what the word meant. It wasn't a place, it was a person. It was Kale. And now, with this bond between them, she knew they could face whatever came next. She took his hand, the warmth of it grounding her, and together they turned toward the exit of the temple. The forest that had once seemed so dark and foreboding now felt different, less threatening, as if it had accepted their choice too. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Elara felt like they could walk it together, side by side. And as the two of them left the temple, the magic of the moon swirling around them, a new chapter began, one that was no longer defined by the curse, but by the bond they had chosen to create. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold. The darkness that had held the kingdom in its grip for so long began to recede, replaced by a soft, fragile light. The battle was over, but the scars of the war, both physical and emotional, were far from healed. Elara stood on the balcony of the royal tower, her gaze lingering on the kingdom below. The land seemed quieter now, but she knew it was only a momentary peace. The aftermath of the siege had left deep marks on Eldervale. The pack, the people, even the earth itself had been changed. The air was thick with the weight of what had been lost and what had been gained. Beside her, Kyle stepped forward, his presence solid and grounded, though his eyes still carried the weight of the night spent battling both his enemies and his own demons. The man who had once been burdened by the curse now stood with a new purpose, the marks of his transformation clear in the calmness of his demeanor. The wolf no longer ruled him, but the battle within was far from over. "We did it," Elara said softly, though her voice carried the heavy realization of all they had sacrificed. Kyle nodded, his expression unreadable. "We survived, but the fight isn't over. Eldervale is free, but the people still need more than just a king. They need a leader who will not only protect them, but understand them." "You've done that," Elara responded, her words firm. "You've chosen to lead with your heart, not just your strength, and that will carry you further than anything else." Kale's gaze softened, his lips twitching in a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "I couldn't have done it without you, Elara." The two stood there for a moment, side by side, watching as the sun began to rise higher in the sky. The kingdom stretched out before them, its hills, forests, and villages bathed in the early light. There was peace here now, real, lasting peace, but it was a peace that had been earned, not given. Elara turned toward him. "Do you ever wonder what happens next?" "Every day," he replied, his voice a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "We rebuild, we heal, and we make sure we never forget the cost of this freedom. The moon's curse may no longer control me, but there are other challenges ahead." Elara reached out, her hand brushing his. "We'll face them together, won't we?" He met her gaze, the golden intensity in his eyes still present, though tempered by the understanding that had grown between them. "Always," he said simply. As they stood there, their fingers intertwined, it felt like the beginning of something new, a new chapter, not just for Kyle and Elara, but for the entire kingdom. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer defined them. Together they had chosen to rise above it, to create a future forged not by curses or battles, but by the strength of their bond. The first light of the sun bathed the land in warmth, casting long shadows behind them. For the first time, it felt like they were truly standing in the dawn of a new era, a future full of promise but also of uncertainty. There would be obstacles ahead, new threats to face, and more battles to fight. But for the first time, Elara believed in their ability to face it all together. The wolves were no longer just creatures of the night. They were guardians, protectors, and leaders. And the kingdom of Eldervale, once broken, would now rise from the ashes stronger than ever. With the dawn came a new hope, and in that hope, a promise. "Let's go," Cale said softly, his voice steady. "It's time to build our future." And together, hand in hand, they walked toward the heart of Eldervale, ready to lead their people into a new day. Years passed, but the memory of that first moonlit night never faded. Eldervale, once broken, now thrived under a new reign. The wounds of war had healed, not by time alone, but by the strength of the pack, and the bond between Cale and Elara, the Lunar Queen. Their love had become more than a tale whispered in the dark. It had become the foundation upon which their kingdom stood. The kingdom's capital, Eldorath, had flourished. Its walls were no longer just a defense against external enemies, but a testament to the unity Cale and Elara had forged. The once silent council halls were now filled with voices of the people, wolves and humans, working together to ensure peace and prosperity for the generations that would follow. But it was not just the city that had changed. The entire land of Eldervale had been reborn. The forests were less foreboding, the rivers clearer, and even the land seemed to hum with the promise of new beginnings. The curse that had once haunted Kyle now lay dormant, controlled not by magic, but by the strength of his will, guided by Elara's unwavering support. One warm evening, under the glow of the setting sun, Elara stood at the edge of the great balcony overlooking Eldorath. The city was bustling with life, yet there was a sense of peace, a peace that could only come from years of struggle and the courage to rise above it. She leaned against the stone railing, watching the children of the pack playing in the streets below, their laughter echoing through the air. "Do you ever wonder if they'll remember us?" she asked, her voice soft, barely audible against the wind. Kyle joined her, his presence as steady and grounding as it had always been. "I hope they do. Not just as rulers, but as people who fought for what mattered, for a future they could believe in." Elara looked up at him, the same man she had met in the moonlit woods, yet so different now. His hair, streaked with silver, was longer, but his eyes still held that same intensity. The man who had been torn between wolf and king had become something more, something whole. And standing beside him, she felt the same. "They'll remember the legacy we built," she said, her hand finding his. "Not because of titles or power, but because we gave them something worth fighting for." Kyle smiled, a rare softness in his expression. "And what is that?" "Hope," Elara answered simply, "and the belief that love, our love, can survive anything." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the sky, Kyle pulled her close, his hand resting on her back. The sound of the wind through the trees was soothing, like a song that had been sung for centuries. The stars were beginning to appear one by one, as if they too were watching over Eldervale, guarding the kingdom that had been reborn. They stood in silence for a while, just the two of them, as the world turned around them. The land, the kingdom, the people. None of it was perfect, but it was theirs, and it was a testament to everything they had fought for. In the years that followed, Elara's name would be sung in the halls of Eldervale. The stories would grow, tales of the girl who had been sold to the hunters, who had stood between the Alpha King and his fate. But what they didn't tell in the stories was the quiet strength she had shown, the way she had held Cale's heart, and how, together, they had changed the world. And so the legend of the Moon Queen lived on, not as a fairy tale, but as a story of two souls bound together by choice, by love, and by the will to protect a future worth living. The moon still rose every night over Eldervale, its light no longer a curse, but a promise. And under its watch, Cale and Elara ruled, not as king and queen, but as two hearts beating as one.